December 19, 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles. The room was filled with the most powerful military commanders in the Western world, and every single one of them knew they were losing. 10,000 American soldiers surrounded in Bastogne, Belgium, cut off, freezing, starving, facing 8 German divisions with orders to annihilate them. The 101st Airborne Division, elite paratroopers, were going to die unless someone could reach them. General Omar Bradley, methodical and cautious, calculated the logistics. Moving an army 90 miles through the worst winter Belgium had seen in 50 years, through enemy territory, across destroyed roads and blown bridges. 10 days minimum, he said, probably 2 weeks, maybe impossible. Then George S. Patton stood up. "I can be there in 72 hours. The room went silent. Not the silence of consideration, the silence of disbelief. What Patton was proposing wasn't just difficult, it was impossible by every known standard of military science. Disengage from active combat 90 miles south, pivot an entire army 90 degrees, and attack northward through blizzards and German defences in 3 days. Eisenhower stared at him. Bradley thought he'd lost his mind, but Patton wasn't joking. He'd already started planning before receiving orders, and what happened next would make Bradley admit something he never thought he'd say about the controversial, profane, glory-seeking general he'd known for decades. The trap was perfect from Germany's perspective. Operation Watch on the Rhine launched on December 16th with 390,000 German soldiers, 30 divisions, punching through Allied lines in the Ardennes forest. The breakthrough penetrated 50 miles deep, creating a massive bulge in American positions. Hitler's objective was simple: split the Allied armies, reach the coast, capture the port of Antwerp, force a negotiated peace. And Bastogne was the key. 7 major roads converged at this small Belgian town. Control Bastogne, and you control the region. The Germans knew it. The Americans knew it. So when the 101st Airborne arrived to defend it, they walked into a death trap. These were paratroopers, lightly armed, designed for quick strikes behind enemy lines, not sustained defensive combat. They faced German panzer divisions, heavy artillery, and overwhelming numbers. 4-to-1 odds, in freezing temperatures approaching -10 Fahrenheit, with dwindling supplies and no way to resupply because the weather had grounded all aircraft. On December 22nd, German commanders sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read it, thought for a moment, and gave a response that would become legend. Nuts. Just that. One word. The German officers didn't even understand it at first. When it was explained, they were insulted. The Americans were insulted that surrender was even suggested. And so the siege continued, with every hour bringing the trapped soldiers closer to annihilation. Back at Versailles, Patton's promise seemed insane because everyone understood what it required. His Third Army was currently engaged in heavy combat 90 miles south around Saarbrücken. You don't just disengage from combat. You have to execute a phased withdrawal, pull back units under enemy fire without triggering a rout, regroup, completely change direction, and attack a different enemy in a different location. The weather was catastrophic. Blizzards, ice storms, roads frozen solid or buried in snow, visibility near zero. Temperatures that could kill exposed soldiers in hours. The logistics were staggering. 130,000 men, 15,000 vehicles, fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, all needing to move simultaneously across congested roads while maintaining combat readiness. Bradley calculated 10 days minimum assuming perfect conditions. Under current conditions, 2 weeks was optimistic. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of all Allied forces, looked at Patton skeptically. Patton looked back with absolute confidence. 72 hours. I'll have 3 divisions hitting the German flank and breaking through to Bastogne. He'd already done something no other commander had considered. He'd anticipated this crisis and ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans days earlier. While other generals waited for orders, Patton was gaming out scenarios and pre-positioning resources. Eisenhower knew Patton was reckless, politically troublesome, and personally difficult. He also knew Patton delivered results when it mattered most. "You have 72 hours, Eisenhower said. Patton saluted and left immediately. Bradley watched him go, certain they'd just witnessed Patton promise something he couldn't deliver. He was about to learn otherwise. December 22nd, 0400 hours. Patton's Third Army began the most complex military manoeuvre of the entire European campaign. 3 divisions, the 4th Armoured under Major General Hugh Gaffey leading the spearhead, the 26th Infantry Division under Major General Willard Paul securing the left flank, the 81st Infantry Division under Major General Horace McBride holding the right. Each division had to disengage from current combat, execute a 90-degree pivot, and attack north in coordinated assault. Military police directed traffic at every intersection, routing convoys with split-second precision to prevent gridlock. Combat engineers cleared roads, built bypasses around destroyed bridges, laid corduroy roads across muddy fields. Fuel trucks ran constant shuttles keeping vehicles moving. The complexity was unprecedented, and it was happening in daylight. Patton deliberately moved during the day because speed mattered more than concealment. German intelligence spotted the movement and panicked. Reports flooded up the command chain. Patton's Third Army was coming. The same Patton who'd devastated German forces in France, who'd broken through at Normandy, who'd pursued retreating Germans across Europe with relentless aggression. German commanders who'd faced him before felt genuine fear. Patton's reputation was a weapon itself. His forces moved with a momentum that seemed unstoppable. But Bastogne was still 90 miles away, and the clock was ticking. Inside Bastogne, the situation was deteriorating by the hour. 18,000 American soldiers crammed into a shrinking perimeter. Ammunition critically low. Medical supplies nearly exhausted, surgeons performing amputations without anesthesia because there wasn't any left. Men with frostbite so severe their feet were turning black, literally freezing to death in foxholes. German artillery pounded the town continuously. Every building was damaged. Fires burned despite the snow because there was no way to fight them. The paratroopers of the 101st had been holding for 6 days. McAuliffe estimated they had ammunition for maybe 4 or 5 more days of fighting. After that, they'd be throwing rocks. Food was gone. They were eating whatever they could scavenge. The wounded were dying from exposure because there weren't enough buildings with intact roofs to shelter everyone. Morale somehow remained high because these were elite soldiers who refused to accept defeat, but the physical reality was inescapable. Without relief, they were going to be overrun. December 23rd brought a brief weather break. The skies cleared for the first time in days. American Air Force bombers struck German positions around Bastogne. Transport planes dropped supplies by parachute. The drop was chaotic. Many parachutes drifted into German lines, but enough reached the defenders to provide a few more days of survival. But survival wasn't victory. The Germans were still attacking, the perimeter was still shrinking, and relief was still distant. Patton's forces hit their first major resistance at Martelange, a small town where German engineers had demolished the main bridge. The 4th Armoured Division, spearheaded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, didn't even slow down. Abrams was cut from the same cloth as Patton, aggressive, decisive, willing to accept casualties to maintain momentum. He ordered an immediate assault without waiting for reconnaissance. Combat engineers built a temporary bridge under direct enemy fire. Infantry attacked across the partially frozen river. Tanks provided covering fire from the southern bank. By nightfall, the bridge was functional and the German defenders were retreating. But this was just one town. Bastogne was still 40 miles away, and they'd burned precious hours. Patton arrived at forward headquarters and erupted, not at the casualties or the difficulty. At the time, consumed. He demanded faster movement, threatened to relieve commanders who couldn't keep pace, personally drove to frontline positions to push units forward. His command style was brutal. He didn't ask for the impossible. He ordered it and expected compliance. Some officers hated him. All of them feared disappointing him, and they moved faster because of it. Christmas Eve brought another brief weather window. American fighter bombers struck German positions. The 4th Armoured attacked a critical crossroads at Warnack. The fighting was savage. Tank duels at close range, house-to-house combat, flamethrowers clearing German positions room by room. The battle consumed an entire day. Meanwhile, the 26th and 81st Infantry Divisions secured the flanks, widening the corridor toward Bastogne and preventing German forces from cutting off Patton's advance. Bradley monitored the progress from headquarters, watching the impossible unfold in real time. Christmas Day, 1944. Inside Bastogne, ammunition was again critically low. The brief resupply had bought time but not salvation. German attacks intensified, sensing that the defenders were weakening. The perimeter contracted further. Wounded soldiers who would have been evacuated in normal combat instead returned to the line because there was nowhere else for them to go. The 4th Armoured Division pressed to within 5 miles of Bastogne and hit the strongest German defences yet. Fortified positions, dug-in tanks, pre-registered artillery. Combat Commands B and A fought through the villages of Chaumont and Cibray with appalling casualties. Tanks were destroyed, infantry companies reduced to half strength, but they kept attacking. Patton personally arrived at the front. His commanders were exhausted, their units battered, and they reported that continuing the assault would result in catastrophic losses. Patton listened and then ordered them to attack anyway. He climbed onto a Sherman tank and rode forward, exposing himself to German fire, daring them to shoot him. It was theatre, but effective theatre. His soldiers saw their general sharing their danger and fought harder. The Germans saw an American commander so confident he rode exposed through a battlefield and felt their own confidence crack. The psychology of warfare isn't just about weapons, it's about will, and Patton's will was unbreakable. By evening they were 3 miles from Bastogne, 3 miles, and night was falling. December 26th, 1944. 0400 hours. Combat Command Reserve under Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Blanchard prepared for a final assault on Eisenhower, the last major German strongpoint before Bastogne. The plan was desperate. 10 Sherman tanks and 250 infantry and half-tracks would attack at maximum speed straight down the road, ignoring German positions on the flanks, driving directly for the town. No subtlety, no manoeuvre, just velocity and violence. At dawn, they launched. German anti-tank guns opened fire immediately. The first Sherman exploded, the second was disabled, the remaining tanks accelerated, firing on the move, infantry hosing down German positions with machine guns, artillery bracketed the column, mortar rounds impacted among the vehicles. Men were killed, vehicles destroyed, but the momentum carried the assault forward. They couldn't stop because stopping meant death. Moving meant maybe surviving. The combat was insane. Tanks ramming through German positions, crushing obstacles, firing point-blank into defensive works. Infantry jumping from burning half-tracks to assault buildings directly. Flamethrowers, grenades, small arms fire at ranges measured in feet. The Germans fought back desperately because they knew what this assault meant. If Patton's forces reached Bastogne, the siege was over. The entire German offensive strategy collapsed. They fought with everything they had. It wasn't enough. At 1650 hours, 4:50 in the afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' lead tanks broke through the final German positions and reached Bastogne's defensive perimeter. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne saw American tanks and erupted in cheers. 7 days of siege, 7 days of thinking they were going to die, and Patton had done the impossible. 72 hours. Not 73, exactly what he'd promised. The relief corridor was narrow, contested, and would remain under attack for weeks. The siege was broken, but the fighting continued. German forces tried desperately to close the gap and re-isolate Bastogne. They failed. Patton's Third Army poured reinforcements through the corridor, widening it, strengthening it, and then systematically destroying the German bulge from the south, while other Allied forces attacked from the north. But the critical moment was that breakthrough on December 26th. The moment when what everyone thought was impossible became real. General Omar Bradley, who'd calculated 10 days minimum, who'd doubted Patton could deliver, sent a message to Eisenhower that night. "I was wrong about Patton." Bradley was not a man who admitted mistakes easily. He was methodical, careful, and often frustrated by Patton's recklessness and self-promotion. But he couldn't deny what had just happened. Patton had moved 3 divisions 90 miles through the worst conditions imaginable, under enemy fire, across destroyed infrastructure, in exactly 72 hours, and saved 10,000 American soldiers from certain death. Bradley's full assessment was more detailed. He called it the most remarkable feat of operational maneuver he'd witnessed in his entire military career. Moving that many men and vehicles that distance while maintaining combat effectiveness violated established military doctrine. It shouldn't have been possible. Patton made it possible through sheer force of will and an understanding of tempo that exceeded any other Allied commander. Bradley told Eisenhower something else, something he never thought he'd say about the general he'd known since they were young officers together. "George Patton is the finest battlefield commander this army has ever had. Not one of the best. The best." Bradley acknowledged Patton's flaws, his political tone deafness, his ego, his tendency to create controversies that complicated command decisions. None of it mattered compared to what he delivered when lives were on the line. The relief of Bastogne wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of leadership principles that would be studied for generations. Aggressive action overcomes numerical disadvantages. Speed and momentum disrupt enemy planning more effectively than elaborate deception. Clear commander's intent combined with subordinate flexibility allows rapid adaptation to changing battlefield conditions. Integration of logistics with combat operations ensures sustained pressure. Every one of these principles was visible in Patton's 72-hour relief operation. Eisenhower gave Patton operational command of the entire Bastogne sector. Patton promised to not just defend, but to destroy the German bulge and drive them back into Germany. Through January 1945, the Third Army attacked relentlessly. No rest, no pause, constant pressure. The Germans called it Patton's steamroller. By mid-January, the bulge was eliminated. German forces retreated with heavy losses in men and equipment they couldn't replace. The recognition came from unexpected sources. Veterans of the 101st Airborne revered Patton for the rest of their lives. They'd been written off as dead, and he'd saved them. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Patton's rival and frequent critic, admitted the relief of Bastogne was among the most brilliant operations of the entire war. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin sent formal commendations comparing Patton's fighting spirit to the best Soviet tank commanders. High praise from a regime that considered most Western generals soft. But perhaps the most telling recognition came from German commanders. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding German forces in the West, called Patton the most formidable Allied general. General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, identified Patton as the most dangerous enemy commander, and General Erwin Rommel, before his forced suicide for involvement in the plot against Hitler, had stated that Patton thinks and fights like a panzer commander. For German officers raised in the tradition of armoured warfare, trained at the highest levels of operational art, that was the ultimate compliment. Patton understood mechanised combat at an intuitive level that matched or exceeded their own expertise. and he combined that understanding with industrial capacity and logistical support they couldn't match. American public reaction was ecstatic. Time magazine featured Patton on the cover. The New York Times called the relief of Bastogne a military miracle. Radio broadcasts celebrated Old Blood and Guts, a nickname Patton earned not just for toughness, but for delivering results when American lives were at stake. Some political figures and military administrators worried about Patton's controversial statements and his tendency to create political problems. Eisenhower and Bradley managed these concerns while protecting Patton's command because they knew his battlefield value outweighed his political liabilities. West Point incorporated the relief of Bastogne into its curriculum as a case study in rapid deployment, aggressive leadership, and operational tempo. Future generations of Army officers studied how Patton accomplished in 3 days what conventional military wisdom said required 2 weeks. The operation became a benchmark. When planners proposed operations, they were asked, "Is this a Patton-level impossibility or actually impossible?" The distinction mattered. Patton proved that aggressive leadership, meticulous planning, and relentless execution could overcome obstacles that looked insurmountable on paper. The key lessons were clear. First, aggressive leadership matters. Patton's willingness to take calculated risks inspired extraordinary performance from his subordinates. Second, speed and momentum overcome numerical disadvantages. Rapid movement disrupted German forces who outnumbered and outgunned the initial American attacks. Third, integration of logistics and combat operations is essential. Patton didn't separate supply from fighting. He coordinated them as one continuous operation. Fourth, commander's intent with subordinate flexibility allows adaptation. Patton gave clear objectives, but allowed his division and regimental commanders freedom to adjust tactics based on battlefield conditions. Patton's campaign didn't end at Bastogne. February 1945, the Third Army crossed into Germany. March and April, they crossed the Rhine River, liberated concentration camps, revealing the true horror of Nazi genocide, and advanced into Czechoslovakia. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, the Third Army had advanced farther and faster than any other Allied force. They'd inflicted massive casualties on German forces while sustaining relatively low losses themselves. The Third Army's operational record spoke for itself. 650 miles advanced, 81,500 square miles of territory liberated, 12,000 cities and towns captured, 1.4 million German soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. These weren't just statistics. They represented the destruction of German military capability through relentless offensive action. Patton never stopped attacking. Defense was temporary and transitional. The offense was his natural state. His philosophy was simple: find the enemy, fix them in place, and destroy them. Then find the next enemy and repeat. This approach consumed resources and risked casualties, but it won wars. Eisenhower understood this. Bradley came to understand it. And the soldiers who fought under Patton understood it best of all. The controversy surrounding Patton's personality and statements would follow him throughout his life and after. He made comments that were politically problematic, culturally insensitive, and sometimes strategically questionable. His ego was massive. His need for recognition was obvious. His treatment of subordinates could be harsh. His famous incident slapping shell-shocked soldiers in Sicily nearly ended his career. But when the shooting started, when American soldiers needed someone who would fight for them with absolute commitment, Patton delivered. Bradley's statement to Eisenhower after Bastogne acknowledged this fundamental truth. Whatever Patton's flaws, his ability to see what others couldn't see and do what others couldn't do made him irreplaceable. The finest battlefield commander the Army had ever had. Not the best diplomat, not the most politically savvy, not the easiest to manage. But on the battlefield, when victory or defeat hung in the balance, when American lives depended on swift, decisive action, Patton was unmatched. 72 hours. That was the promise. 90 miles through blizzards and German defences, moving an entire army while fighting on two fronts simultaneously, saving 10,000 soldiers who'd been written off as lost, and delivering exactly on time. The relief of Bastogne stands as a permanent benchmark in military history. Decades later, military planners still study it. The operation demonstrated that determined leadership combined with tactical brilliance can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, that the impossible is sometimes just the difficult that nobody has attempted yet. That speed and aggression create their own advantages beyond what's visible in strength calculations. That American military flexibility and industrial capacity, when properly directed, could outperform more rigid command structures despite theoretical efficiency disadvantages. Patton embodied all of this. He was aggressive to the point of recklessness, but his aggression was calculated. He demanded the impossible from his troops, but he demanded it from himself first. He accepted casualties as part of war, but he never wasted lives needlessly. He sought glory and recognition, but he delivered results that justified the acclaim. And when soldiers were surrounded and dying, he promised to save them in 72 hours and kept that promise. General Omar Bradley, methodical and cautious, who'd doubted the promise could be kept, admitted he was wrong. The finest battlefield commander the army ever had. That assessment came from a man who worked with Eisenhower, Marshall, MacArthur, and every other senior American commander of World War II. Bradley wasn't given to hyperbole. His judgment carried weight precisely because he was measured and careful. When he said Patton was the best, it meant something. Patton died in December 1945, killed in a traffic accident in Germany just months after the war ended. He never returned to America in triumph. He never got the post-war recognition he craved, but his legacy lived on in the soldiers he saved, the campaigns he won, and the standards he set for aggressive, decisive leadership. The 101st Airborne veterans who survived Bastogne told their children and grandchildren about the impossible relief, about the general who promised to save them in 3 days and delivered, about old blood and guts who never abandoned soldiers and never stopped fighting. That legacy matters more than any parade or medal. Saving 10,000 lives matters more than personal glory. Delivering on an impossible promise matters more than reputation or recognition. The Germans feared him more than any other Allied commander. His fellow generals respected him despite finding him difficult. His soldiers followed him into hell because they knew he'd lead from the front and never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. And when it mattered most, when the impossible needed to become possible, Patton delivered. 72 hours, December 19th to December 26th, 1944. The operation that proved aggressive leadership, operational tempo, and absolute commitment could overcome any obstacle. The operation that made Bradley admit Patton was the finest battlefield commander in Army history. The operation that saved 10,000 American soldiers and helped win the war in Europe. That's what Bradley told Eisenhower after Patton did the unthinkable, and history proved him right.